design. In fact, the most attended session yesterday was a graphic design session. And so I'm sure that you're going to get lots of questions and answers with this.
I love it. That's great, because that's kind of where I came up with this topic. Is half the people you work with a graphic designer, but they're kind of that one sole island in the marketing team, and except for what you're working directly with them, they don't know what the designers do most of the time. So this is kind of hopefully this is what we actually do and can offer. So we'll see what happens.
Honestly, I'm excited about this because I think it's going to help me be a little bit more understanding and like empathetic to graphic designer in the world, right? Like I think that's probably something that I could benefit from as well. So we are at 3:10. That's
excuse me.
Go really quick. We're slated to go right now. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and step off of microphone and video. I will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, but I just need a little bit of break off of the screen. So okay. Kristin, if you want to go ahead and launch in, and then we'll
sure.
Real quick before we get started, do you prefer to have questions throughout, or do you intend to answer the questions at the end?
Let's do it at the end, because okay. I find questions sometimes bring more questions, and a discussion is so much easier when there's nothing left to go through as slides.
Absolutely fair. So we'll run through a presentation here, and then so please, for those of you who are here, put your questions in the Q&A that's over on the right hand side, so we can kind of aggregate those. Like chatting is great, but let's just make sure that if you have an important question for Kristin, that it ends up in the Q&A. So that's all.
Perfect.
All right, Kristin, the floor is.
All right. Well, thank you, and thank you everyone. It's great to see you guys on a Friday afternoon, and after sitting through all these sessions, that's a lot to absorb. So thank you for being here. So we'll get started here. Okay, just a little bit about me first. My name is Kristin Clark. I'm in Seattle, Washington. I have been a designer since the grunge era here in Seattle, and I have worked mostly in-house, but I have been a design lead for many industries, from corporate to AEC. I was the creative director for an international nonprofit for women. I've worked for the government, and I also have my own freelance business that I've been doing for many years, and I just love design. It's so great. But recently, I've been switching over from hands-on design and moving into executive design coaching, which is helping people like yourself learning how to bring design thinking and creative process into your processes to help make more interesting and better presentations or interviews or whatever needs to be done. So we'll get started. I'm going to talk today about what your in-house designer and new ways to strengthen their roles, as well as for the overall team. And it's all about going from designing to design thinking and slightly pivoting the way things are done to help make everyone's role more creative, interesting, and with everyone, with a little luck, save time. That's always the issue, right? So today, I want to touch on a couple subjects, and they are including what do designers do? It's surprising how many people don't know what we do, and we sit right next to them. How to pivot the mindset slightly so it can really make a difference in the big picture. And then also adopting the idea of the kickoff before the kickoff. So what do designers do? The role of the in-house graphic designers is a very unique one. People tend to not know what they do. They think they're either there to create org charts or Photoshop the dogs out of their headshots. It's all over the board when you ask someone, what do you think I do for work? It's really funny to hear what people say. So if marketing is on the left side of the brain, then design is on the right. And then we bring a skill set and ideologies to complement the processes and concepts of the marketing team, and it creates the perfect brain. So what exactly do designers do? Make it pretty is something I've personally heard my whole career. And designing is what they do, but design thinking is what they bring to the table. So designers make things effective, and they add value that ties everything together. The designers are the ones that put it all together, the information from the beginning to the end. And just like everyone, they wear a lot of hats. So above all, they're the storyteller. They're there to make sure there is a consistent story frame going through everything they do. They're the brand specialists. Their job is to make sure that the company and the brand is properly represented. They're the ones who have the design guide. So if things don't look right, they know how to fix it to make the brand stand out. They're also the producer. They literally make everything you guys are working on, and in most cases, the designer is the first and last person to touch the document or the slides or whatever before the client does. Another thing they do is they take the data, in complicated data, and their job is to simplify it, make it aesthetic, and make it work so that it is an effective tool in a document or a deck or however you need to be using it. So consider a slight change to the role of the designer from the very beginning. And it's important to have the designer at the kickoff meeting and involved. Designers think differently. They know how to pick out the nuggets. So have them, they bring a creative viewpoint to the table that no one else would be thinking about in this conversation. So at the kickoff, they should be listening and jotting down what they hear, as well as concept ideas or past graphics they've used that they can bring in that might work as a design solution. Allow them to ask questions to the team that will challenge their perspective of the project. I always reserve at the end of the kickoff to repeat back to the team what I'd heard and then ask them, is this what you're trying to say? And that's where the aha moment comes a lot. Is that I say, this is what I heard. Is this what you're trying to say? And most of the time they're like, yes, that's exactly what I want to say. But sometimes you're like, that is nothing like I'm trying to say. And that brings a conversation back to the table of what are you trying to say? And I have to tell you again, big time saver. I also bring up questions that came to mind while they were talking, words that are often said. So there might be key words that turn into a theme that they're not even realizing they're saying at the time. And that's been brought up a lot. Themes or story that immerses. These are all things that I'm jotting down and listening for so that at the end of the meeting, they know exactly where it's coming from and what needs to happen next. And are we on the right track before even starting? A story about this is I was working for a team in Alaska that was bidding for a build-a-suit for an animal shelter. And I was listening to the team discuss the initial details, and I had two main observations that was brought to mind. One of them was this was a very small town in Alaska that the community had spent the last 7 years raising money just to build this animal shelter. So that needs to be, this is a special case. This isn't a government click off the boxes and we're good to go. This is something that could really have a lot of humanity, and this could be something that tells a story that appeals to the common people, not the businessmen. Second story, the second focus I heard was that literally everybody at the table had adopted an animal from a shelter, some of which were from the actual shelter they were replacing. And that was another eye-opener for me. And I thought, well, let's focus on that. So instead of headshots in the bios, we ended up putting their animals' pictures in the bios with a little story saying how they got their animal and how important they are to their family, and how the importance of their love of animals will contribute to this project. And it turned into a conversation at the kickoff. Well, why don't we keep going with that and obviously work on the details of the establishment of what we want to build, but let's pepper it with other pictures of our pets, as our kids playing with the pets, our love of animals. And it ended up looking like a mini coffee table photo book. And it was fantastic. Yes. Thank you. It ended up being this amazing project. And it just was a beautiful piece at the end that we never get to do normally. So we really took advantage of the situation. So then consider pivoting even further and think about actually co-leading with the designer. These are times when you can be switching places with each other so that you can do one-on-one sessions with people that need a little time to talk more things out. It saves so much time because half the discussions at the table don't need to involve everybody at the table. So you've got half the people sitting there just doing other things, checking their emails and things, when they could be using their time more valuably. So at times you can have the marketer person move over to one person and the designer take the lead. And while they're doing a one-on session with somebody, the designer could then be talking to the team as a whole, saying, you know, what kind of graphics do we want to use? Are there specific photos that need to be taken? The details of the designs. Let's work on the overall look and feel. What are some content that we can turn into a graphic, and do that as a group too. So that by the time you come back together, you've got a very solid strength. And like I said, bring design into the whole element, not just weight. From my experience with this contest, it's been extremely successful. It makes the meetings so much more efficient, and actually people end up having fun. It's a lighter, better experience for everyone. But to add on to this, it's kind of slow there. Create the kickoff before the kickoff. And to me, this has become a real game changer. So this is the marketing lead and the designer come together and map everything out. So, you know, you already have all the information you need, right? The page limit, the content, the requirements, et cetera, and things like that. But just whiteboard it. Get out of your chairs, get up on the board, and start focusing on the design and what goes where. It doesn't even have to be the details of the content, except at times I've even put like literally pages up on it, and we just drew boxes and squares and shapes to represent how we wanted it. And it shows us exactly how much real estate per project and per content piece you want to have and things like that. You start talking about themes and ideas and strategies that would make the team stand out. What graphics would work as a stronger element than, say, content or a photo instead of, you know, what. Start talking the details kind of like that. And if done right, you can walk into the kickoff meeting with almost the entire layout done. And again, this cuts so much time out of the process. And the team always appreciates that, because they don't need to try and be creative or come up with the idea on the spot. It's already done for them. This is also important, is that it gives the designer more time to play and work on the design and the graphics, and or have a solid concept already ready. It's so much easier for the designer and gives them time to be more creative, instead of you coming to their desk after the meeting with a bunch of notes and them having to come up with something creative from someone else's notes. An example of this was a couple of years ago. My marketing lead came to me to help brainstorm on, we had a ton of very specific content they were asking with a very small page count. And so we're like, okay, well, let's break this down. And so we started to realize that what they were really asking for was a timeline. And so we figured that out just by sketching. We're like, well, how are we going to fit all this wording into it? And we're like, well, does it have to be wording? Let's play with this idea. And so we started realizing that 4 pages of content could become a 2 half-page timeline that goes along the bottom of 2 facing pages. And then I started thinking about, well, there was a magazine I saw that was amazing timeline that I've always wanted to steal the idea from. Why don't we play with that a little bit? And again, just from us sketching and playing on the board and what about this and what about that, you know, kind of talking and having fun with it, we started realizing, well, why don't we make the whole proposal like a magazine and turn it into an editorial layout instead? And so we suddenly were like, well, let's do this. And what if we did a photo with text on top of it instead of, you know, this? And we did that. And it turned out fantastic. And so we brought it in, we printed out what we had, and it was just a wireframe. You know, there wasn't a lot of content. There was just design and style to it. We brought it into the kickoff, and they were ecstatic, and they loved it. And we got praises from the client. We won the project almost hands down. And the cool thing is we turned the layout into a template. So we now have a cool template that we could use again and again. So it's all about thinking ahead and getting the design elements there. And it changes everything. It truly, truly does. So by rethinking roles and pivoting from design to design thinking, it helps everybody. It can make the process more efficient while being so much more creative. And with a little luck, it brings new ideas to old problems, which can result in more wins and a lot more job satisfaction for everyone involved. I just can't say enough about this process. And it's all about bringing the designer in. So I want to thank you guys. Like I said, it's Friday. You made it to the end, and I appreciate your time with me. I would love to answer any questions you have. And if you have any questions later on, we can definitely, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from anyone. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it looks like so Crystal's we struggled with the visual aspect of this session. Kristin, I think there are a couple people who were just kind of unlucky in the seminars, and you kind of may have had a little bit of a lack of luck with some of this presentation. But if you'd be willing to share the slides with our participants,
absolutely.
Okay, that would probably be something that we would want. So for those of you who are attending, you can either watch the replay to grab those, or Kristin can share them in the community as well. Mm-hmm. So I don't see anything in the Q&A, but Kristin, after having worked with designers in the past, one of the best practices that I have found is that I don't ever show up with the idea of what I want to have designed. I usually show up with I don't show up with an outcome in mind. I show up with a list of required things that I know I need to communicate to the client. If I'm somebody who's looking to leverage a graphic designer, do you have top 3 ways to make sure that you're successful? If you're not a designer and you're trying to interact with this team?
Talk. And like I said, the more you talk and with people, right? So get your team going and brainstorming and whiteboarding. You don't have to be a designer to get into this concept. And I have to tell you, it expands the mind so much more than, okay, I've got to do an org chart. Oh, I've got to do an infographic. Oh, I've got to do this. I've got to do that. So put those in there. But start literally laying out every page of the document that you want and saying, well, put what you need to have in there, and then say, well, what is that really necessary? What if we did this, and just start talking. And what if is the greatest thing to start a conversation with. I have to tell you, more ideas have come from, hey, what if, we did this? And like I said, it changes everything. Another one is it's funny, but I steal ideas all the time. It's okay to do that. And one of the things I've always started to do is, it's a little on the old lady side, but it works, is I create a Pinterest account for the team that everyone signs up for, and I start the categories. So here's a page layout, here's a TOC, here's an infographic, here's an org chart file. And every time someone finds something they like, they throw it in there. So you suddenly got a library of ideas. And that has been my go-to for years as well. It's such a fast way to grab something when you don't know what to do and you have 5 minutes to come up with an idea. What do I have in my library to steal?
I am taking a personal note of that right now. That is a brilliant idea. Because I remember back in the day, but in maybe 2010, I had an actual physical binder of proposal assets that I really loved. Did you as well?
I even further back, we're talking 90s when I started, right? Mm-hmm. So I had actual design magazines that I was constantly tearing pictures out and throwing them into my folder. So it was my go-to, because half the time someone comes up and says, I need it by the end of the day. And you're like, I have no idea where to even start. Yeah. So it started with the hard print magazine ideas and has moved to digital. And it saves so much time. It's great.
That's a huge takeaway. Yeah, I used to have a folder full of because I did newspaper design when I was, one of my first jobs out of college was copy editing in a newspaper, and I would grab my favorite newspaper front pages and put them away in this binder. Yeah.
Oh, I still do it with magazines. I love magazine layouts, so I'm constantly ripping things out. Yeah, it's great.
That's amazing. All right, yeah. Pinterest board to get inspired. All right, we do have a couple questions here.
Sure.
Does the designer have input on word count and text content versus room allocation for graphics? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
That, again, talk is that's the marketer's job and that's the designer's job. So how can we put them together? And designers, if they're working in-house in the AEC business, especially, they still know what has to happen from the marketer's point of view, right? They at least they should. And that's when you start working. And so even if you don't have actual content yet, you can fill an entire document with fake content and get a word count. So you can at least start putting things in and building blocks and saying, okay, this 2-column piece here, I can only get 400 words in there. Okay, so what can I write for 400 words? And then you start breaking it along. So almost think of it like building blocks on a page, right? You can start stacking things, you can move things around, you can move it up, move it down, stretch it out. So that's when you start playing with it. But you can always fill a document with fake text just to get a word count. So it gives you an idea of how much you can put into places.
Great advice. That modular, it's like newspaper or magazine design.
Mm-hmm. It really is. It's just, it's a page layout. Yeah.
That's spectacular. Jen asks, what do you, this is a good one. What do you do when someone tries to steal a graphic and wants the exact same thing remade? How much change do you have to make to the things in your swipe file?
This is when the brand comes in. You need to follow your company's brand. So if you change the color palette to your brand, that's enough. And no one has copyrighted any graphics, I have to tell you, because they are so easily 2 tweaks and it's a brand new graphic. So you can do whatever you want. But like I said, focus on your brand. So make sure that it looks like it belongs to your company, not to whoever you stole it from. And that usually will fix the problem right there. Or play with the idea, change it, maybe improve it a little bit and see what happens.
Well, it makes me think of so I don't know, I've got a lot of tattoos, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of artists that obviously you don't do someone else's work. So it's 20% of the change is typical enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to be inspired by somebody else's work, but then
mm-hmm.
I know if I'm paying a lot of money for a tattoo, I don't want to end up with the same thing that somebody else is walking around with. Right. So that's a really interesting parallel, and just being able to change the colors, just changing the fonts, changing it slightly. That's really...
It is so fun you said that, because I too have a tattoo right here, and it was designed by a Dutch graphic artist, and is about living in the moment. So you have splashes and splashes, but you're always focused on the center. And they designed it specifically to put out in the world, and they gave it to everyone saying, this is my view, this is my design, but I want to see what people do with it. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the concept. And so I actually stole a design for myself.
That's incredible. Yeah, Amanda says, I posted my tattoo on Pinterest and now tons of people have my tattoo.
Yes. I found a couple tattoos on Pinterest. I'm like, oh, I kind of want that. Yeah. So stealing is not a bad thing in this case.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you're going for, doesn't it?
Yeah,
that's absolutely fair. That's absolutely fair. All right, we are racing up on the end of time here. We've got about 8 minutes left. Stephen asks, what's your typical lead time for graphic generation? I usually run on a fast track, 2 to 3 weeks. Graphics fall to the side too often, and that's disappointing to me. I personally feel that way because I'm often working in these fast turnarounds. But what do you advocate for here?
Well, that's what, again, get them started at the beginning, because half the time the designer gets notes from someone who took at a meeting, and then they have to sit and decipher what was figured out, and that's half the kill time. So if it's a templated layout that you already know pretty much what's going to happen, lesser time. But there are projects where you need a lot of time, and I would say 2 to 3 weeks out, but that's a luxury half the time. Most of the time, one of the things that killed me, but again, it was so worth it, was I had an interview process, and I flew down to Portland for the team to work on, and we were there for a whole week. I mean, this was a big project, and it just was so frustrating because I sat through all the meetings all day and we were working on graphics, but then at the end of the day, all of the changes and all the new graphics we'd come up with, I had to go back to my hotel room and spend the night working on them. So it went from, we had established some great ideas to, we got some new ideas. So guess who gets to work late, because, and that happens a lot. But yes, it depends on the deadline of the proposal or the interview or whatever project you're working on. But like I said, get the designer involved as fast as possible so that they have an input. They may have ideas they want to play with, and playing takes time as a designer. So you really need as much time as possible. But then you have times where you need a quick turnaround, and then that's where the Pinterest comes in. So, or you can steal from another proposal and just change it a little and you got it. So just remember, things physically take time with the designer. So give them a break and give them time. It's worth giving them a little extra time if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a question for you just personally, because, talking about design thinking as opposed to just graphic design, because like, I think a lot of us look at it like pretty pictures, right? And what, to your point, like make it pretty, there's a whole system of thinking about how to do design for software systems, how to do design for your home that like actually suits, right? This whole systems thinking. Where did you learn how to do this, and how can other people find those educational resources?
Yes. So design thinking is really today's way of thinking for everything. Don't even think about it. It's just being graphic design. It is literally for everything. And I kind of self-taught myself without knowing I was doing it, because I was stuck in a job where it wasn't that interesting to me, just doing the same thing over and over and over. So I started thinking, well, how can I change that? And so I started attending the meetings on my own and started thinking, okay, this isn't what I'm hearing. How can I make this better? How can I do this? There are courses. I'm self-taught, and then I have taken some certification courses. So there are design thinking courses all over of different. Start in LinkedIn. They've got some little freebies there if you guys have access to the LinkedIn classes. YouTube has some classes, so you don't have to pay any money if you just want to kind of get your fingers wet and see what happens. But it's a way of rethinking everything, including we're using design thinking to rethink just the internal structure of how the market team works, how to get things going, for interviews and for, I've started coaching executives and engineers, especially, are kind of a problem, is people who don't have those skills I can help with, right? And design thinking is half the process right there too. So start small, Google it, go to YouTube, and just figure out what it is that you want to get out of it. But then there's things like, there's people like me that you can hire to come to your team and walk you through the process, or individuals walk through the process. So it's how involved you want to get with the whole thing. But pay attention to it. It's what's happening right now as far as most things go is design thinking process.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that there's a ton of actually really credible training sources out there about this. I don't get the sense that in the design thinking space that there are a lot of like used car salesmen, kind of smarmy, like people who are providing tend to be pretty solid, right?
Well, it depends, because if you're open to it, there's always things that you can improve upon. Because what design thinking is about is, what does the client say they want, and what opposed to what do they really need? And it changes everything. I mean, even in the proposal, say if you're doing just for like a sidewalk, right? I mean, like a sidewalk replacement, something simple that is almost a no-brainer. Maybe they don't need just a sidewalk replacement. Maybe they need something that's added to the community. Like, is this going to be part of something bigger, or do they need it beautified? Are they looking for a cheaper way to do it with a better material? What are the engineers in your company thinking about to make them stand out besides just, we know how to replace sidewalks? And like I said, there was a class I took when I was getting my certification, and you had to find a client who needed something and then start digging deeper. And it was the person that I used as my example was a girl who has a body that doesn't fit most clothing store clothes, right? So she's always wanting something more stylish, but she can't get anything. So she started buying fabric. Well, she didn't really know how to sew. So then she was like, well, how do I learn how to sew? And then you realize it's not because she wants to learn how to sew. It's because she's trying to find clothes that fit, that have some style. So how do you fit that need as opposed to just teaching her how to sew? And through that process, you started coming up with a clothing store that had lines of custom clothing where you would pick items out and then they would measure you and they would make your clothes. And then side of that was, if you do want to learn how to sew, here's a fabric store that gives you patterns that fit your body, and then you can use that to make your own clothing. And it just keeps going from there. So sometimes what the client's asking for isn't what they really need. And it blows their minds when you tell them this is what you really need. And that's kind of where design thinking stems from.
If you just gotta keep digging. Jen says that she would love a certification list. If you could pop that into the community at your convenience. If you
yes, I would have to. I don't have it on. Like, I don't have a list. I'd have to bring it up, but I can definitely include a list of things.
Yeah, if there's something we could share, that would be spectacular. I think there's just so much. Make it pop, make it pretty. There's so much more, and I think you have really helped us dig into that. So I know that, Kristin, that you did share your LinkedIn link. I'm going to go ahead and copy, or Stephen found it for us, and actually put your LinkedIn in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and put it in there one more time to surface that. We are at the end of our sessions right now. It is time for us to take a 5-minute break, head off to our ending keynote. Thank you so much, Kristin, for this incredibly deep and thoughtful approach to graphic design and to design thinking. I think I'm taking away a ton of great takeaways, not the least of which is this Pinterest idea.
I know. It's just the little things. Like, all of a sudden you're like, why didn't I do that a long time ago? Yeah.
Spectacular. That's brilliant. Just little hacks to make our lives easier. 5 minutes, we're heading off to talk to Bobby, who's going to teach us about how to be great thought leaders in our space, because we are proposal industry experts in this room, right? We are experts. We need to have people understand that we're experts. We want to improve our career access. We want to drive our own personal brand. This ties in and brings together all the concepts that we've been teaching you so that you can leverage your career to get more money in your pocket, more eyeballs on you on social media, and really become the proposal industry expert that you have always wanted to be. So let's celebrate the end of our conference with Bobby. Let's hop over there in about 5 minutes. I will see you on the main stage, and we will get that started. Thank you so much again, friends. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye. Everyone have a good weekend.